Hello, welcome back. We are at our final video in the Belonging Basics series. Thank you all so much for watching these videos or listening. Some of you might be grabbing it from Spotify. Thank you for the last time in these videos for our generous funding from Rocky Mountain Human Services. We really appreciate that. And let's get started. We are talking about the last two P's from the 4 P's of inclusive routines. We're going to talk about person-centered first and then playful. When we think about person-centered routines, we are thinking about routines that are designed to support each child in a way that reflects who they are and that honors their strengths, their needs, their ideas, their preferences, what do they love, their identity, and their family. And this actually includes meaningful choices, always within our community agreements. If you haven't watched the community agreements video, we would strongly encourage you to start there because all of the pieces of inclusive routines are anchored in community agreements. That's what keeps it from becoming chaos. So we're thinking about meaningful choices within those structured community agreements while also honoring different ways of communicating. There's no hierarchy of what is considered the best communication. Using an AAC device, gestures, eye gaze, spoken communication, all of those are valuable and important ways of sharing thoughts and ideas and preferences. We're also thinking about many ways of participating. What are the range of options? And we're going to get into some examples. And then finally, we're thinking a lot about how do we know that every child has what they need to feel included and capable and connected? How does the environment, the activity, the routine match what they need to be part of it? Like, we designed this with you in mind. We talk about that a lot. And so when we think about this, I was telling Jackie, this brings up an example for me when my daughter, who's 20 now, was in a preschool setting. She was in a full day preschool and they had a rest time in the afternoon. I don't know if any of y'all are doing rest time. Shout out to you because it is one of those times as a preschool teacher where, first of all, it's hard to get 18 to 20 children all on cots and resting and not bothering each other and whatever. But also I know that that's when you try to do your prep work or your meetings or your breaks. And so nap time just gets piled on with lots of things, or rest time, whatever you're calling it. But in this particular setting, at the time, they did have a very predictable routine in which the teacher would get all the cots out, children would take their loveys and their blankies and go sit on their cots. And then the teacher would, lower the lights and put on some soft music. And they had a little routine of some kind of thing they would say together to get ready for rest time. And in the beginning, the expectation is every child would lie down on their cot then and close their eyes and quietly rest. And eventually, if they weren't falling asleep, the teachers would move around the room and pat their back until they would fall asleep. And when my daughter was in that classroom, she was more interested in putting her bunny to sleep than just lying on the cot. And so what they did is they got to know her, and they knew within their community agreements, right? You don't get to make noise. You don't get to run around the room. She would sit next to her cot and put her bunny to sleep. And then the teachers would put some of the other children, rub their backs and help them fall asleep, and eventually come over and rub her back. And it's just a simple example of how they chose connection over compliance. They chose to think about who she is and what she needed rather than rigidly saying, get back on your cot, get back on your cot, lay down on your cot. They just left her be. She sat next to her cot and modeled what the teachers were doing and patted her little bunny's back until it was her turn. It's just a simple way of thinking about how do we put this into practice.
Love that. So it made me think of a couple things if I can jump in quickly. First of all, something I learned from a teacher when I was working in a childcare center that really helped us, just like a little rest time tip if you're not already doing this, which is another way to be person-centered, is they all had quiet buckets, and there was an area that at lunchtime they would go and they would put out the different quiet bucket choices that matched what different kids were interested in, and they could rotate them around, and they were quiet, calming activities. And that's another example of person-centeredness here, choosing the activities to fit the strengths and interests and the routine and the time of day. Both of those examples make me think about what person-centered really is. We would have said child-centered if we weren't trying to get the 4 Ps and alliteration And so child-centered might be what you're used to hearing, but it really just means we start with the children and we center them, and then we plan and design and support around them and who they are and what we know about them. And what you were talking about too, Sally, reminds me of oftentimes in other work, we'll talk with teams about anchoring in kids awesome. And we'll also invite them to think about what is the child's strengths-based way of communicating and preferred way of communicating, what they love, what their ideas are, their preferences are. If knowing that is hard or it feels challenging to be able to answer those questions about a particular child, that's a pretty good indicator that there's some work we have to do around building belonging with them. If we don't know those things about them, it's likely that they're not experiencing belonging. We know belonging correlates with behavior. And in this example, like what you were saying, this situation could turn into a compliance driven battle or struggle every day at nap time if they weren't really understanding of Taryn and what she loves, and they weren't able to build that routine with her and her peers in the center, still within the context of, their community agreements. So
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about this before. All of this really does come together in a comprehensive way. It's not linear, it's not separate. I was even thinking as you were talking about the rest buckets, that gets back to purpose. What is the purpose of rest time? The purpose of rest time is some downtime where children are able to recover and rest and take a little break and not have to negotiate all of the social skills and learning requirements and all of those things. And whatever your preferred way of resting is. Some of us fall asleep reading a book, or maybe rest for us is knitting. And so thinking about what does rest look like for this child is person-centered, it's playful, also it's purposeful, and all the things do come together. And so just to wrap that idea up before we move into some examples is we're moving into like, how do you do that? You have all the steps from previous recordings as far as determine your purpose. What are you trying to do with this routine or activity? What's the predictable steps we can do? And then again, how do we plan those steps and those choices with every child in mind? And so what is it that we want to add to as options, or how do we want to create pathways for strengths, interests, home language, ways of engaging, etc.? And again, we're always thinking about inclusive engagement and making sure that there's ways that feel natural and affirming to a child rather than asking them to do something that's really outside of their comfort or their ability.
I think something that you said is really important. When we say adapt for inclusive engagement, we don't mean adapt for a specific child so they do something different in the routine. We mean adapt the routine to include the way that they do something as a real way, as a meaningful choice that they and their other peers could choose as much as possible as we can do that within the routine. That's how we get to that level of really building belonging with each other.
Yeah, I think that's so important. We're always thinking about changing the environment. If you think back to the quote about if a flower isn't going to grow, we don't change the flower, we change the environment. And so that's what we're always talking about. And it makes me think in the example I gave you about my daughter, if other children wanted to sit and put their lovey to sleep, that could have been an option too, because we've adapted for that inclusive engagement, as long as, again, everybody's following the community agreements and whatnot. So let's look at a couple other examples. And the one I want to start with is in the middle on the top of the screen. And as you're looking at that, I'd love you to think about when Jackie and I are designing professional learning in person, if we have the opportunity, we always think to ourselves, wouldn't it be great if everyone could bring whatever they need to be comfortable and support their learning, whether that's a beanbag chair or a bouncy ball or a standing desk or a blanket or coloring. Maybe you want to color or knit. And what we see in the example on the screen is these teachers have gone to Goodwill and they've asked for families to drop things off that they don't need so that they can create as many of those options for kids as possible. And so in that video, you see we've got someone in a rocking chair, we've got someone on a floor, we've got someone on a squishy seat, and all of those options are available to all of the children all of the time. And that's person-centered as well. Not only do they have options of where or how they have their bodies, they also have options for what do they get to do with their hands. I've led a lot of professional learning where adults are doodling or they're playing with Play-Doh, knitting. And so in this example, those kind of options are available. And that's part of planning for person-centered.
I think sometimes it's easy for me to think I'm uncomfortable, but they can get down and up off of the ground more easily than I can. And that actually makes me think of two things. One is it's not always easy for kids, even if it looks easy, depending on where they are in their development in terms of physical motor or muscles. And sometimes their brain has to put so much energy just to be able to sit a certain way that it's hard to focus on other things. So this is person-centered in that regard too. And then also, again, going back to the choice that everyone has. It's not just an accommodation for the child who we might know that about, but it's choices where we're teaching kids I can check in with my body. I can choose a different way to sit each day depending on what I need or how I feel or what my energy level is. And what wonderful things to be able to start helping kids learn at such a young age.
And crisscross applesauce is fun because it rhymes, but beyond that, I'm not sure what the reason is or the purpose, right?
Some other examples here. This top left one is actually my daughter, Juniper. One of her individualized goals was moving her mouth in a certain way to make different sounds. That's still something she works on at 8. But they knew that that was an individualized goal that they were supporting her with, and they turned it into a morning arrival choice for her class. And then they made it social instead of just something that you might do alone. You picked a sound card and it shows what the mouth does and it has the little words on it, and then you show it to your friend and they make the sound and then you make the sound and you can look at yourselves doing it in the mirror. And the kids thought that this was really, really fun, and it was fun for June and a way for her to practice these things with peers. Cool fact, it also got her really interested in literacy at an early age, and we were joking that most of you know about June and her diagnosis by now. And at the age of 2, she was already learning a lot of letter sounds and blending them together. And her 2-year-old teacher said, "You do know she's basically reading." But we'll get to this in a second because it was fun and it was playful. And that wasn't necessarily the purpose. It was this fun side effect.
Yeah.
Unplanned outcome about it that she showed us what she was capable of when it was fun too. In the other one, this is a common example that people oftentimes give in terms of choice. And what we would encourage you to do is make sure that your pictures are centered around the children in your classroom in terms of their identities and what will be meaningful for them, and even representing maybe beyond the children in your classroom and inviting them to have conversations about people who might have different identities or different strengths that they do within the imagery that you choose for different things like this too. Blocks, that's just a nice choice. We can choose in the person-centeredness of it all, choosing where to play, when to play, and again, making sure that those options center around the actual children in our classroom, not necessarily what we think or we've always done, making sure that even if we are using a curriculum, for example, that we understand the purpose and we make sure that we design those activities or those experiences with every child at the center. This last one is just fun. It's the house from Encanto. This teacher, she loved Disney, and so did most of the kids in the classroom. And so different parts of the room she would always theme. She was very artistic and creative as well. I thought that it was a fun way to show that even the environment, that was their dramatic play center, can be centered around children and what they love. And maybe she wouldn't do that the next year if children were interested in other things, but it's the big things and then it's the stuff that we might change out more frequently that really build belonging.
Yeah, and I love that because you said Encanto, and again, we all know Taryn's 20, so when she was little, it was a whole different set of things. We were all about Dora the Explorer and the Tangled movie and things like that. So it's good for us to know that what children's interests are is based on the culture and the context of what's going on in their lives, and that's really fun.
This is another quick example of person-centeredness. So it was important for some of the families in this classroom for kids to be practicing their writing, fine motor skills, understanding their name, learning their name, the letters of their name. As we know in early childhood, kids are at all different developmental progressions when it comes to that combined. There's a lot of things that you need to know to be able to write your name. A lot of skills that we got to put together, and kids are going to be in different places across all of that. Again, person-centered, knowing where they are, and then designing this sign-in routine around the strengths. And you see here, there's a visual support that shows you can pick something to warm up your hand, and then you can pick your writing utensil or a support on it. All kids have that same choice. When you're done signing in, you can put it back in its little bin where it goes. And then the sign-ins are individualized to each child too. The occupational therapist and the teaching team would meet regularly to see where kids were in terms of their progression of being able to sign in their way. And then they could scaffold their supports in their individual paper sign-in. And then whether that's even using utensils or whether sometimes that's maybe using blocks or using something that's even more multimodal, depending on what that child prefers or their strength. And they're all together. They're all in the same routine. They're all doing the same thing in their way with the choice of doing it one another's ways as well.
I think that last point is my favorite part. We talk a lot about creating systems for our routines, communication systems, where every child has access to AAC to hear the question of the day, as well as to see the visuals of the question of the day, or to have a peer read it. And this is a system where everyone has access to all of these options. And I think about that in terms of belonging, because not everyone might need a warm up, but everyone has the option to try it. And so no child is stigmatized or separated from the group by having something different. Everyone has the same options, and it's certainly not hurting anyone. What a fun way to warm up your hand. And so again, this is that belonging-based piece of ensuring that we have these things in our environment. They're already ready for everyone. And we're planning for many ways of doing the same thing.
And this makes me think about a point. I was watching a video the other day of a mom who shared a video brushing her daughter's hair, and her daughter was crying because she didn't want to wear her braces. And one of Goldie's best friends wears braces on her legs, and our friend, who's Goldie's friend's mom, commented that she had a similar conversation with her daughter about that as well recently. And when you just said that, it made me think there are, of course, going to be scenarios or situations where an individualized accommodation is appropriate and necessary, and just it is what it is. And I think that the point here is, as much as we can make it so that not every single thing that a child experiences or does feels different, which will ultimately make them feel different, the better, the more we can build belonging. And so then when there are those scenarios, when they really do choose something different or separate for themselves, or need something different or separate, it's not layering on to every other thing that has already felt like that throughout the day.
I think that's a really good point and an important reminder. There's also one of our videos talks a lot about how to celebrate and appreciate strengths. And so if you're looking for some ways in those scenarios where we do have a child with braces, or we have a child with a wheelchair or adaptive communication, if you're looking for ways to talk about that with your whole class, there's a video in the series that you might pop back to so that you can build your repertoire of language.
And then this is the last example here, because we get to partner with a lot of kindergarten classrooms, first grade, second grade. These are examples of when you might have a little bit more academic content. How can we still continue to make it person-centered? Once we get into kindergarten, first and second grade, we have more of those academic just expectations, and choice and focusing on person-centeredness enables us to be able to do that and to meet those expectations of kids who are in lots of different places in a way that feels inclusive and builds belonging, because they get to do the same thing or the same types of things or activities with the same purpose, have choice in it, get to do it their way, while also choosing an activity that meets them where they are.
Yeah, I love that. And so, as you wrap up this section of the video, you might pause here, go into your activity guide, and just work through some of the prompts about where do you already offer these options that are person centered. I think if you pause for a moment, there's probably places where you're naturally doing it. And our invitation is always to be more intentional or to think about how do you build on that strength. Think about how this is exciting to you. Where does this give you permission to do what in your heart feels like the way that you want to support children in your class or students in your classroom? And then maybe you're wondering about something, and that would be a great place to check in with a coach or pop into a community of practice if you have that available. You can certainly reach out to us. We would love to talk about it. I think our email is all over these things, so you can find the email at the end. And then once you're finished with that, you can come back. We're going to wrap up this video with our last P, which is playful. And here it is, our playful part of our routines. We've talked a lot about play throughout all of our video series because we work in early childhood and developmentally appropriate practice is grounded in play. And so when we think about our playful routines, it's really just, again, an invitation, a permission slip to remember that young children learn through play and that our activities and our routines should have a playful nature to them and align to those developmentally appropriate practices. And in an inclusive classroom, when we think about playful routines, again, this is going to consider what is it that each child in our room enjoys. Jackie gave the example of Encanto in one of their classrooms. Maybe you have a classroom that in general is very interested in dinosaurs. Maybe you have a particular child in your class that's really interested in trains. There's ways for us to bring in what children love and enjoy and make sure that that play builds on those skills and interests. We want to be thinking again, always about choice. How are we providing those meaningful options that feel right for each child? What are the supports that we want to have ready all the time so that we aren't doing it after there's a problem? We're already thinking about supports. Partnering with families is a really fun way. I know one of the programs that we work with, they had families help them bring in different types of food for their dramatic play area for kitchen that represented what people eat at home. So what they got in their Lakeshore kit was apples and bananas and oranges, and maybe there was some rice or pizza or something. And then they asked families and they sent in empty boxes of food, some chopsticks, things like that, just so that it felt like it was representative of each child's family culture as well. And then, of course, this last piece is supporting the unique development of play skills and honoring that each child is where they are, who they are, how we're building on their play skills while thinking about those responsive experiences.
That makes me think of this, which you might have heard Sally and I say already, but it's absolutely something we say frequently. From Play Spark, you can buy this sticker from them, I think, online. All play is okay. And the point here is that sometimes we've learned through our experiences or what we've been taught, either because someone has taught us that or because we've learned it over time, that there are certain ways that children should play, or there are certain plays that are more advanced than other ways or more appropriate than other ways. And from this lens and from a belonging lens, we know that all play is actually okay, because play is no longer play if someone tells us that we have to do it a certain way. It's meant to be what's meaningful for us, which is oftentimes different across all of us, and for sure different across children. So we encourage teams to think about what are the ways that kids already playing. If a child is lining up toys, for example, how can we build on that in the block center to promote their belonging, or start where they are and support them to play by their friend and slowly support them to start getting involved with one another in meaningful ways, while remembering that all play is okay. We're not trying to change a child's way of playing to be more like other friends, and because our community agreement is in line with that, we all lead, we all follow, we all all teach, we all learn. Sometimes we might play like our friend, and sometimes our friend might play like us. And that's part of our community agreements. And because we focus on belonging, we make sure that one child isn't getting the message that they need to change the way they are to play like their friends more than others. And that's a balance. And it's not an exact science. And you'll know, and your kids will show you when you're striking that balance in your class.
I think this is one of those easy examples that we bring up in a lot of our PD sessions. A long time ago, I was coaching in a classroom, and there was a little boy who was neurodivergent and in an inclusive classroom and in many ways thriving. But when there was an opportunity for a bunch of children were building a train track, they were trying to get the train to go around and over and wherever the trains are supposed to go. And he had picked up 2 tracks and was banging them together and was really interested in the noise it was making. And the teacher wanted him to build the track with the children that were there. And that was frustrating to him because he was really interested in the tapping. And so what we worked on was, how do we honor that for him, play is listening to what that sound makes. And then how do we also help him see, and your friends want to build this train track for the train to go around? And how do we take turns? Can kids also make the sound? And then can we figure out, how does he build? Or can we give him his own set of things so he can continue to do that while being with his friends who are building, and honoring that it's not wrong to want to tap the train tracks together. It's just different. It's just different.
So some of the ideas that we have here for playful routines are really in connection with everything we've already said. This is kind of a beautiful video to wrap everything up with the reminder that, like Sally said, kids learn best through play, so do adults. There's so much science behind joyful learning. When our brain is nervous or our brains are thinking about, I have to be a certain way, I have to comply, we just aren't able to take in information and synthesize information and learn and grow as well as we can when we're calm and we're co-regulated, and with young children, when we're playing, when it's multimodal, when there's different ways to explore and experience as much on our terms as possible. So designing them with fun and joyful play. Play isn't a break from learning or a time of day, it is learning. Include many ways to also connect during play. Honor different styles of play and preferences and communication, and support the development of play skills over time. So the other thing that we really want to emphasize here before we end this video is we're still supporting kids and facilitating their growth within play. We're starting where they are, and we're doing it in ways that match who they are, what they love, and that are meaningful for them. The point here is that we're not saying that if a child plays in a certain way, that's where they stay. And we don't offer them the opportunity to learn and grow, or that we don't presume their competence, that they can continue to build on their play skills.
I think what you're getting at, Jackie, is so important, because the presumed competence piece means we believe that you will start here and keep growing and learning new things. And what we're sending the message of is where you're starting is meaningful and important, not wrong. So we're not trying to say, stop doing your way of playing and do it this way. We're saying, hey, your way of playing is really cool. Can I show you another cool way to play? Can I show you some more ways you might do that thing? It's really about connection and belonging and belief that, again, all way is okay, and there's more ways to play, and let's learn those together.
I love that.
And so that takes us to the very last opportunity for an activity guide. You can go back into your resources. The routine planning tool is built out so that you start with that purpose, then you move through predictability. All the way through, you're thinking about meaningful choice. You're thinking about your community agreements. You're thinking about those person-centered options that presume competence, and then always make it playful wherever and however you can. And so with that, we would love to just leave you with considerations of the dimensions of belonging and how each of these intentional practices do lead to every member of your community experiencing belonging with one another, and digging into those, however that is meaningful for you, with your team, with your families, and thinking about it for yourself as well. And as I said before, you can continue the conversation with us. We would be more than happy to reconnect, to stay connected. You can find information about Jackie and I on challengingtoconnected.com. And we've really enjoyed being able to do this series with you. So thank you for your attention and your commitment to having opportunities for every child and family and staff member to experience inclusion and belonging. We out.
That's it. Heart, heart.
Okay, how do I stop this thing? Aha, stop.